started. So thank you for joining us today, everyone. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. We have muted all lines, but if you have a question or comment, please type into the chat section and we will be responding throughout the webinar. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you joined our fourth webinar in a series, Leading Through Crisis. Today in our roundtable discussion, a group of international trade experts will question, answer, and battle over issues impacting global trade now. I am Monika Jedeszko. I am the VP of Global Carnet Operations here at Boomerang Carnets. I've been with the company for 12 years, and we assist companies here in the US and UK with expanding to global markets using Carnet documents. Please don't forget, like we mentioned in the invite, you can sign up for a 30-minute business consultation with any of our panelists or CSSRs here at Boomerang. We want to help you through this time, and please sign up anytime during this webinar. I will be posting the link in the chat section of the call. So thank you for joining. We are going to get started. I will turn this over to our moderator today, Andy Shiles.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you again for joining us. We're going to go through, we got it, you've seen the bios of our panelists. I will just tell you, we have some phenomenal folks. One of the first ones up is going to be Ken Roberts, who's a guy that has, he knows numbers frontwards, backwards, up and down, and he and I have had some fantastic discussions. Jeremy Page is one that Jeremy is very well respected. He and his wife both have Page Fura and handle a lot of things. You just mentioned, you saw Monika there. Rachel Pisani is a phenomenal marketing person. She's in the industry and been around in the trade for several things and is going to have some good insights. Kurt Wilson is our CEO at Boomerang Carnets, and he and I have been good friends for a while, and he is just intriguing in as we spar on different issues and ideas that come up, and it's always a great discussion on all of that. And then Dari is one that is, most people know Dari is, she's the one that we all have to listen to as far as some of the details. I'm telling you, this lady is one that I always have to sharpen up to make sure I can hold myself in the conversation with her, because she knows so much on that. She's going to forget more than I'm going to get to learn on compliance. So first off, why don't we do this? We're going to turn this over to Ken Roberts to let him go through some statistical information, and then it's going to be an open discussion on a lot of things that we'll go through and see what's going on in the trade. So Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you. He's on vacation in South Carolina, so I greatly appreciate you joining us for this.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for having me, and nice to meet the others of you. I should tell you, when Andy first called me, he said, Ken, can you tell me what's going on with international trade? And I said, Andy, God only knows. And he said, well, give me 24 hours. I'll get back to you if I still need you, and we'll see if I can get God to comment on that. And 24 hours later, he called me. And I guess God had other things that he needed to deal with other than talking about international trade. So you're stuck with me today. You can see my bio here today. I contribute 5 times a month to Forbes. I'm a member of the Federal Reserve's Trade and Transportation Advisory Board in completing my second and last term. My company, World City, we process a lot of trade data through our website, ustradenumbers.com, where we also have a number of our publications that you can download if you'd like. Every week I release a Trade Matters video, and I speak on things like this. So before we go to the first slide, we're going to try to engage those of you who are participating today with a series of very easy to answer or quick to answer poll questions. So we'll go ahead and put the first question up there. If you want to just take a second to answer that, you can read, but I'll read it out anyway. So what we're comparing is this June, that data was released just yesterday. And I sort of worked on it yesterday and put this together. So we looked at June of this year compared to June of last year, and then compared that change to previous months, May and April and so forth. So looking at the June data which just released, is it better or worse than May when compared to the same month in the previous year. It's either has the trade is that rate of is the rate of decline increased, has the rate of decline decreased, or is it neither, that trade actually increased in June when compared to the previous June? And we'll have a series of these questions like this. And I will say this, it's been I think we all appreciate what a topsy-turvy world we live in these days. To give you a sense of that, this year, for the past 18, 20 years, I've been looking at trade data, and the #1 port in the country, that's more than 450 airports, seaports, and border crossings. Port of Los Angeles has been #1 every month, almost without exception. And then last year, Port Laredo, Texas, a border crossing, passed it. This year, there have been 4 different ports that have ranked in the first 5 months of the year, first 6 months now, that have ranked #1. So it's really amazing. And then top trade partners, lots of changes there and so forth. Whenever we're ready to close off that poll, we'll see what people think.
Yeah, so we just closed it off, Ken, and it looks like the majority, 52%, believe it has decreased.
Okay, let's punch up that next slide.
And I'm going to share the results here so that you guys.
Oh, there you go. Great. Super. There you go.
Yep. There you go.
All right. So here's the top part of this on the right looks at year-to-date data, and the bottom part looks at comparing just June to June. And throughout most of this presentation, I'm just going to be looking at June to June because, as we all know, the world is changing very rapidly right now. And so over the course of the last 2 decades, as I've looked at trade, I've traditionally looked at year-to-date data. But I've switched this year to month because it's just moving so fast. So here I'll have both of you, but as you can see on the left side, the U.S. deficit has increased both year-to-date and in the month of June because exports are falling faster than imports. But the answer to the question is that rate of decline is 17.4, it's the bottom of your screen, 17.47%. As bad as that sounds, that's actually better than May. So the rate of decline has actually decreased. It was up around 30% in the month of May. Now, do I know what's going to happen in July or August? I don't. I would have to tell Andy. God only knows that. And we'll see if we can get him for the next webinar. So we'll ask another poll question here quickly. And so I'll run through this quickly if you want. So overall trade through the month of June is at 1.77 trillion. The numbers on the top are in trillions. That's the T there. And the numbers on the bottom are in billions. So you see there's a lot of red triangles. The only thing that has gotten bigger is the deficits both year to date and for the month of June. I can explain why later. So here's the second question. If you look at the 5 top U.S. trade partners in the month of June, there's 3 continents represented there. What is the top ranked country from each of those continents for the month of June? Now, this one's a little trickier. The questions get a little trickier as we go along here. So Canada, China, United Kingdom, Mexico, China, Germany, Canada, Germany, Japan, and Mexico, China, United Kingdom. So you're looking for the top country in each continent that ranks in the top 5 on that one.
And that
again,
would be
looking at the current
trade.
Go ahead, Andy.
U.S., right?
Trade with the U.S., I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Trade with the U.S. And I will tell you, there's been, I mentioned that the ports had changed and who ranked #1. Right now, if somebody asks you who was the #1 U.S. trade partner, you could give 3 answers and not be incorrect. And I can explain that why if you want, after we close out this poll, because you might be close, Rachel, to want to close this poll out. Maybe we've got the answers. If you need another minute, I can explain that, but let me know.
Yeah, no, we've got it. Here we go. So the majority, it looks like they're saying B, Mexico, China, Germany.
Mexico, China, Germany. Let me see, I'm waiting for my results to show on my screen here, which
it should
there
share.
you go. So I have to admit, when I do these questions, I try to see if I can get the answers as close to balanced among the questions as possible, and this one did a moderately good job. So interestingly enough, if someone asks you who's the top U.S. trade partner right now, you could say Mexico, because in 2019, for the first time ever, Mexico was the top U.S. trade partner. You could say Canada, because year to date, Canada is the top U.S. trade partner. And you could say Mexico because for the month of June, and this is the answer to the question, Mexico was the top ranked trade partner. If you want to go to the next slide, you'll sort of see, see this. Oh, this will be the next slide. Let me tell you a little bit quickly about this before we get to the next slide. So the balance of trade. So I mentioned earlier that the trade deficit was growing. What is also changing a little bit, and this is a different sort of statistic that I sort of like to use. It's the balance of trade between exports and imports. So whereas a trade deficit or surplus is exports minus imports, this one is going to be essentially exports and imports divided by total trade. And this statistic almost never moved very much. So, but in the last, on an annual basis, in the last decade, it's been between 40 and 41 cents. You know, I was looking for my phone and I couldn't find it. Now I found it. So let me take care of that.
Now we all know where it is.
Exactly. I know it's here somewhere. So what you see is that about 63% of all trade in June was an import and 37% was an export. Well, that figure, as I just said, has gone between, it's usually a 60-40 split. So you can again see that balance of trade is shifting even as trade declines. So if we go on to the next slide, then we'll see the answer to that second question, which is the top 5 trade partners. And there you see China, Mexico, and Germany. Now, what's particularly interesting to me about these 5 flags is that I have never seen Germany ahead of Japan. Then if you look at Japan at the bottom there, their overall trade with the United States in the month of June only is down almost 37%. That's a very big number. And if you look on the import side, it's down about 44%. Otherwise, if you look at the other countries, China's overall trade is just down 2.6%, whereas Mexico and Canada and Germany are 18 and above percentage points. So a big decrease. By the way, the first 3 there, China, Canada, and Mexico, account for about 40 to 45% of all U.S. trade by value. Canada and Mexico are affected by 2 things: the decline in energy and automotive industries, and Japan is largely an automotive industry issue. So we got another poll question here for you. This one will be on U.S. exports. So 4 of the top 5 exports fell more than 40% in value in June. 1 fell more than 50%. Was it oil, gasoline, airplanes, and parts, or computer chips? I told you they're getting a little bit harder, right? These are getting a little more difficult.
Wow.
And this one, I won't give any clues. We'll see what happens here. I could give a clue, but
Are the panelists voting as well? Are you guys voting as well? Dari?
By the way, the one green triangle on the top trade partners for June that you see is exports to China, up just a smidgen, 0.82%. So that's a nice thing. Remember, with the case of China, there's a trade war that's been going on for some time. So we're comparing numbers that were already affected. Last year at this time, there was a lot going on in the oil sector. China has recently become a big purchaser of U.S. oil, and about this time last year, they just said decided they would not be. Okay, so here's the answer. Man, we have a very smart audience today. I thought that was going to stump some people. It did not. I mean, it stumped some people, but the correct answer will be C, as you'll see from the next slide. So you can pop it to the next slide there. And that's a third factor. So we got the trade war, we got the pandemic, we got economic recession, and we also have Boeing in a difficult place. And so a large part of U.S. trade in this particular category is going to be Boeing. I mean, there's parts and so forth, but off 56, almost 57% in the month of June. Now, in fairness, aircraft don't just fly out on, it's not like an assembly line in terms of it's 6 a month. There are waves and so forth. Depends on orders when these jets are ready. But nevertheless, we all know that Boeing is having a difficult time now. Look at the second export, if you will, there. Computer chips up 9.71%. That's an interesting category. few leading export categories have declined as precipitously over the years, as have computer chips, and probably many of you have seen in the news how the computer chip industry has gone offshore, and there's certainly an interest in bringing it back onshore. If you look at 3, 4, and 5, they were all off more than 40%, gasoline, oil, and motor vehicles. So we'll put up one last poll question here, maybe the import question. 3 of the top 5 increased in value in June. Which 3? So take your stab at that one. And interestingly enough, on the export side, oil has become a very large U.S. export. It's many people are surprised when they see oil ranking as the United States' 4th leading export, but with the hydraulic fracking industry and with the change at the end of the Obama administration, which ended the Arab oil embargo from 1973, essentially ended it. We have become a big exporter of oil to the world. And we obviously export a lot of motor vehicles as well. As you saw it on the, go ahead. We got our answer yet, Rachel, or are we still puzzling over this one?
There were a couple people that were coming in just now.
Okay.
We just closed it out. There you go.
Okay, we got computers, cell phones, and medicines is the top answer of 71%. Let's click ahead to the next slide and let's see how our participants did. Computers, cell phones, and medicines. I don't know, Andy, where you got these participants, but they're ringers, man. I'm never going to play you in a pickup basketball game, I don't think, or at a pool table, in a bar or something like that. So yeah, clearly a mixed bag, each with their own story. If there's time, I'd be happy to talk about any of these. But the interesting one, number 5 there, is exports returned, and this is actually without change. There's 2 subcategories in the data: exports with change and without change. This one's without change. We just abbreviated it here. This is where you may see a lot of stuff, a lot of the products that you guys are dealing with at Boomerang. I believe they're going to pop in here, but you're also going to see a lot of aviation parts. You're also going to see a lot of automotive parts. You're going to see, I think you'll even see a fair number of things that might be what we call Amazon type products. I think we've all seen the statistic that 1/3 of everything that Amazon ships out gets returned. People like to try it on and send it back or something. I'm not one of those people, but apparently that does happen. And again, as you can see here, motor vehicles on the import side way down. If you remember back to the earlier slide where Germany passed Japan, that's what's happening there, because that's a very big import from Japan to the United States is motor vehicles, and those are just way off. On the computers and cell phones, if I had to guess, I would say some of that is sort of pent-up demand and just the way things are falling and when they fall. They're also being compared to last year when, again, the China trade war was in full swing. Medicines is a very big category in general, but some of that could be PPP kind of stuff and could be related to the coronavirus. I'm not sure about that, but could be. And with that, I would say let's go to the last slide, which I believe will be how to get in contact with me. So if anybody wants, so at the top there, ustradenumbers.com, we have more than 10 million data sets that are updated every month. The June numbers are not up yet, but should be up later today. So it'd be for every airport, every seaport, every border crossing, more than 200 countries, more than 1,800 different exports and imports with all sorts of data, monthly data, year-to-date data, annual data, a lot of stuff there. So with that, I will turn it back over to Andy.
Yeah, let me just say, folks, that Ken's publications are phenomenal. And instead of you trying to gather information, he's already done the work for you to where then you can look at it and be able to analyze, apply your expertise rather than spending time gathering statistical data. You can actually analyze and see where the niche is. So as we're looking at that, let's go back to one question I have for you, Ken, is that other than China, the greatest growth seems to be with Mexico, Canada, and probably Germany as far as with exports. Did I see that right?
Well, the export markets is a little tough right now, but those are going to be our biggest partners. So just in terms of sheer volume, yeah. And I mean, and just outside of that top 5, you have South Korea, UK, France, Actually, Switzerland at the moment is a big trade partner, and that's a whole another interesting story. For the first time ever in the month of May, the leading import into the United States was gold. And that has now since fallen off, but that was essentially gold is something that the financial sector, generally speaking, likes to use to hedge its bets when there's times of financial uncertainty. And because the passenger jets weren't flying between Europe and the United States, the gold was trapped in London, and they couldn't get it to the United States. The price of gold, which was already going up, continued to go up, and then they were able to release that floodgate, and it all came from. Traditionally, gold does not go from Switzerland to the U.S. It goes the other way. It's imported into the United States and heads to Switzerland or Hong Kong or UAE or something.
Well, with that, let me go back. You mentioned it's interesting that the top import-export ports, the most active ports, this past year, we've had 4 different #1 ports that are going in there, which probably, and Jeremy, I'm going to throw something at you, but first off, Ken, is do you know off your what those 4 ports are? I'm curious as to who's competing.
Yes.
Top echelon.
Yes. So Port of Los Angeles is the traditional top port. We'll probably end up the top port for the year, and has 2 of the 4 months, January and June, has been the #1 port. In February, it was Port Laredo or Laredo, Texas. They do about 95% of their trade is with Mexico, and they handle about 35% of all U.S.-Mexico trade. So as the China trade war had its impact, that actually gave an opening for Port Laredo. In March, you had O'Hare International Airport, and that O'Hare does a tremendous amount of trade with China, which helps it. But it also does it does a lot with medical supplies, so anything involving the pandemic probably was going to be a factor there as well. So medicines, any kind of pharmaceutical, medical supplies, and trade with China. The following month, it was JFK in New York, and that was for O'Hare and JFK were both first time, and JFK was the gold story. So all that gold from Switzerland was coming into JFK. To make all those jittery financial people maybe just a touch less jittery. But if you follow this thing, gold has topped $2,000 and is still on its way up. It's why people who pay attention to this stuff are saying, why is the stock market going up and gold at the same time? You would think they would go in opposite directions, but they are.
I was going to mention, if I may.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Andy. I was
Darren, go
going
ahead.
to mention, if I may, being born and raised here in Southern California, and actually, having a lot of family that works down at the ports and so forth in Long Beach, it's been very interesting to watch the historical history of what's going on, especially with today's business climate. If you would like to see the kind of the ups and downs of what's happening at the Port of Los Angeles, if you go to their website, Port of LA or Port of Long Beach, because believe it or not, they're both connected. They're both right next to each other. And the executive director of both ports, they put out some great information. So you can see the products that are flowing in. You can even find it on LinkedIn. They put out reports daily. But it's been incredible to see since the start of the pandemic to where we are today. And to Ken's point, the decrease, or I apologize, the increase has been pretty significant. I think, we all heard about the scare and everything at the beginning of this, 5 months ago or so when this started, and things had really slowed down at the port at both Long Beach and LA and LAX also. But, as things are ramping back up and so forth, little by little, and again, I have several friends and family that work at both ports. The precautions that they're taking are unprecedented. It's like, if you talk to these folks, it's like nothing that they've ever seen.
Right.
So, I mean, just even from the crane operators who are debanning the cargo ships, I mean, the cleanliness and everything that they're having to go through, and the protocols, the temperature taking and so forth. So, I mean, I think just like any industry, whether you work in a nail salon, right, or a hair salon, et cetera, a restaurant, all the precautions that are being taken, even from the trade side, are incredible. So the fact that things are continuing to move as well as they are, I think, is just a testament to how much, you know, we want to get back to the normalcy, if you would, if you can call it that, today's normal, right?
Right. And by the way, I should mention, we probably will be doing a webinar with on LAX and a webinar on Port of Los Angeles, as well as a number of other, actually, and also a number in the Texas area, the border crossings, within the next couple of months. So you watch me on LinkedIn or follow me wherever, you know, whatever, or email me, I can make sure you're made aware of that.
Jeremy.
Yeah, and back to your point, I apologize, Andy, and back to your point, Ken, very quickly, what's happening along the borders between California and Mexico and Texas and Mexico, it's unprecedented too. I mean, I don't know if a lot of people know the reports about how rampant the COVID is along those, you know, those areas. So again, the precautions that are being taken from the port of entries, you know, here in California and Otay, for example, it's I've never seen anything like it. It's incredible.
Let me ask you, Jeremy, as far as what you're looking at, as far as some of the trade agreements that we've seen that have, like the U.S.-Japan took effect in January, there was a lot of hype about it, but it's like maybe it is or is not, you know, panning out. USMCA, some things in that. Ken and I had talked about that in the past, but from your perspective, what are you seeing as far as any trade agreements that may be opportunities, or others that maybe we were hoping for some activity, but it hasn't panned out?
Well, obviously, USMCA has hit the ground running hard. You know, despite a lot of requests that it be deferred, delayed, a little time to chew on regulations before they go into effect, we didn't get that. So it's a very steep learning curve for everyone, although, you know, people like to say there are a lot of industries that aren't affected. It doesn't affect, you know, it's true. There are big sectors that aren't really affected that much, if at all. But for an industry like the auto sector, the rules are just incredibly different and way more complex. And so, you know, the squeaky wheel here did not get what it was hoping for, because unfortunately they weren't able to delay or defer. There is an informed compliance period that is being used by customs right now, which is a 6 month sort of a gap period to let people grow into the agreement. But what customs might consider acceptable informed compliance could vary from an importer, obviously. And this is sort of a unique agreement because USTR has really kept control over this agreement in a much more extensive way than I've ever seen a trade agreement be influenced. So customs has sort of been a wingman in a lot of ways on this. And I know anecdotally for customs, they themselves are having a learning curve. So there's a little bit of patience required for USMCA. There's still some interpretation going on. I know there's one issue in the auto sector that's sort of raised the hackles of the auto industry right now that they're trying to negotiate or discuss with customs and interpretation, or USTR. I'm not sure which one is pulling the strings on that one. So that's the law of the land. And I think the wild card on USMCA will also be something like the labor provisions, because they have more teeth and they're more directly part of the agreement. That was the sort of the final negotiating process, part of it they had to go through to get House approval. And those provisions can be pretty onerous, and they can cause you to lose your benefits under the agreement. So there's going to be a lot of scrutiny applied from day one, and so we'll see how that goes. Japan agreement, the funny thing about both USMCA and the Japan agreement is don't ever say free trade for either of them. It's not even part of the name. So we're so used to saying FTA. Well, there's no F in either of these. We used to joke under NAFTA that it was the eventually free trade agreement, because it was, and then, but it's not true. I mean, U.S.-Japan trade agreement, it is anything but free. It is anything but comprehensive. Be very cautious if you're sourcing from Japan. Don't presume that you can take advantage of the agreement. It's very narrow in scope. It was meant to be sort of a first stage agreement to get something out there. And it was sort of rushed out of the gate at the end of December last year. There wasn't a lot of publicity. I mean, there have been discussions. Everyone knew there was negotiations going on. But even from day one, ACE programming wasn't in effect. You couldn't claim the JP special program indicator because the systems weren't ready for it. So you had to literally not claim it for, I think, until January 15th, and then they had set the programming in. So even from a customs side, there wasn't preparedness for the agreement. So if you're looking at benefiting from that agreement, you must look at the specifics. It's not like these meaty agreements we see with lots of detail, lots of areas of coverage. There's only like 240 or so classifications from a U.S. inbound perspective that apply. Many are agriculture, but there's different types of machine tools and tooling, some electronics, motors, articles of plastic, metal. I mean, there's a variety of things that are in there, but you have to look at your classification of the commodity to see if you can even benefit. So don't presume, if I source from Japan, let me see if there's a rule that I can apply. You've got to go, if I source from Japan, does my classification even get covered? So we'll see what that agreement means. It was always meant to be the first step. The remainder will be much more difficult, I think, to negotiate if it even happens. You know, there's efforts to start discussions, but obviously with everything else going on in the world, that's very tricky. And I'd also say that's probably the challenge with other agreements we're looking at. You know, we've kickstarted with the UK, we've kickstarted with Kenya. There have been some high-level discussions with the EU. You know, the UK has got its own issues, obviously, with Brexit. You know, Boris Johnson was confident that he can run these multiple paths of Brexit, you know, negotiating a trade agreement with the EU while at the same time working with the US. Neither of them are panning out very well for him at the moment. But there is, I know there's been scuttlebutt that the US and UK are trying to get at least some very high level agreement, sort of analogous to maybe the Japan agreement, so they can both walk away with some sense of a win, even though it would be an interim win. So
Right.
there's the tension to see what happened there. And the UK is not an insignificant market to the US, so I think, you know, Ken could probably weigh in, but maybe I think I saw the other day it's only about $4 billion only. I wish I had $4 billion. I could be Jeff Bezos then. But, you know, so we'll just have to see what happens there. And then Kenya, I think they were just starting another round of discussions. There's a lot of tricky issues there because of the continental wide agreement and how that might be integrated. There's some language about trying to create carryover from one to the other. A lot of the concern there is AGOA, and when AGOA might go away, and making sure there's something in place that'll create opportunity to still access the U.S. market. And Kenya is really, if not the strongest, one of the strongest economies in Africa, and that's, I think, why it was, you know, a target to begin with. So we'll see. There's a lot of political issues on all of these. You know, GMO, the fact that we chlorine wash our chicken, geographical designations on commodities. The EU is very strong in that, and the UK is no less strong. So issues you might think are peripheral in some ways aren't peripheral to these partners, and they're going to have a big impact on where these agreements might go.
Well, as we're talking through this is one of the things that for the audience as a whole, as we are hitting on things, one of the things I'm wanting all of you to be looking at, we're trying to hit on certain things that we're seeing, some trends and all that. So for the audience in general, I want you also to understand that this is not something that it would be overwhelming if you tried to figure out all these different trade agreements or whatever. So as we're talking through this, what I want you all to understand is if you're needing some assistance, we're going to be more than happy. We've got resources that we can put you in contact with, if not within in-house, that we can help you achieve you know, an expanded market. So that's one of the things that we're looking at is trying to help you and go alongside. We want to come alongside you. As we're looking at that, you mentioned UK, Jeremy. One of the things, Kurt, with the US, UK, and those kinds of things, with, you know, our UK operations as well as some of the things in your business dealings, what are some things that you're seeing as far as maybe opportunities between US and UK companies that, and as far as international trade there? Do you see any trends in that realm that's going on?
Thank you, Andy. The main trend is U.S. companies have subsidiary offices in England, and they're looking at Brexit as an opportunity to increase trade into the EU. But those companies have the what we call our cousin trades with the UK, and that trade has always been strong. Of course, with the COVID, it's dropped considerably. We look for the bounce to come from the Brexit challenge. One of the things that HM Customs is anticipating is a huge increase in customs transactions, which include exports as well as imports. And for fear of being overwhelmed at the customs level and the port level, especially down on the southeastern coast, where the EU trade comes in, they're considering, when I say they, HM Customs is considering and has implemented a trial period where chambers of commerce will electronically help in those transactions through their regional locations and their customers and members under those types of import transactions. So it's, again, Brexit has been on the precipice for how many years, and as Jeremy said, there's really no plan yet because the EU is battling with what they're battling with, trying to keep the economy going in the different countries. There used to be 28 countries. Now the UK is leaving. There's no plans to increase and replace England. And of course, England's one of the biggest trade partners in the EU. And so what we're doing is anticipating the increased trade with those companies that are based in the UK that have operations, headquarters and or subsidiaries for UK-based companies. And that trade should increase, as well as the trade into the EU. You know, from a businessman, we're looking forward to it. We can't wait because it'll increase numbers. And so we're limping along here, just waiting for the big bang to happen. And hopefully it'll be Jan 1, 2021.
Let me throw something to Derry here, is that with what you're hearing so far and all that, are there any, I mean, one of the things, before we start looking at opportunities, one of the other things I want to ask about as far as being able to cut cost and things of, everyone's supply chain has been really disrupted. With that, are there any surprises, Derry, that you're aware of that people are experiencing in their supply chain that they, other than, okay, I got to reroute something because I used to have an air cargo flight or something that's going on now, the routing is one thing, but are there any, just in general, things that have been surprises? And second to that, what opportunities are there to reduce costs possibly in the supply chain from your perspective?
From, talking to folks in the industry, continuing to talk to colleagues, staying in touch as best as we can, right? The one thing I have found more than anything is that folks are going back to basics. They're really going back to revamping the supply chain and going back to really, if you would, square one. Because, with everybody working from home, and then because of the climate of the business of today, there's also, at the beginning of this whole thing, and again, this is in talking to colleagues, is that there was a lot of downtime because folks were trying to figure out, how are we going to communicate with one another? How are we going to schedule a meeting to have a meeting to have a meeting? Like when we were in the office, you'd have several meetings a day and so forth. And it's how are we going to use the time wisely with us being at home? Because we can't touch out to everybody, and we can't see everybody one-to-one, and the business travel, has completely stopped. So going back to your answer, Andy, people are really, I have talked to several colleagues who, are managers, directors and above, and even some C-staff friends who have said, what we're doing is we are going back to our staff, and thankfully, hoping that people aren't laid off and so forth, going back to our staff and really kind of, I call it digging back in the cold cases, in the cold files. Like if we had a trade lane that was in Vietnam or Thailand, can we continue using that? Does it make sense? Really getting in touch too with the supplier base, reaffirming relationships with brokers and with freight forwarders and with carriers, ocean, truck, rail, air. I don't care, what mode of transportation. It's, are what we doing today make sense? Is there a better way to do it? Number one. And back to the cost saving question, the way that we've been doing things, and I love, this is my favorite thing ever. We've been doing this forever. This is the way we've always done things. Well, we're certainly in a business climate where we can't say that this is the way we've always done it. How can we do it better? How can we do it more efficiently and under the scrutiny of today's business environment. So it's really, and interestingly enough, I mean, me personally, I've talked to people I probably haven't talked to in 2 to 3 years within this industry who are looking for new options, you know, and going back to the Carnet option. I mean, we talked about this, the folks on this panel a couple of days ago when we first met, you know, using Carnets is a fantastic way to move your goods. And a lot of folks just may not be aware of the dynamics involved in being able to do that. You know, the beauty of a Carnet is it's online. You don't have to go out. You don't have to wait for somebody to file it and so forth for you. And so I think the efficiency is probably the main key to that answer.
Okay, good. Let's talk about, I'm going to shift this a little bit and look at, as we're the different opportunities. Again, there's niche markets for different industries. And one of the things, Rachel, I want to talk to you a minute on talking about expanding. How, if a company is looking at their current market, obviously the domestic market in the US alone has shrunk considerably as far as the economy has, and so is the global economy. For those businesses that are still functioning, they're in the out of all of this, and this is for the attendees, I want you to understand, we're trying to look at ways to help you survive and then thrive. That's the two things here. You got to survive and get through. The next couple of months for me are going to be the toughest. Fourth quarter, my personal assessment on that is I expect fourth quarter to be much better business-wise. But saying that, Rachel, for right now, what are some things, as far as from your perspective, a company should be looking at when they're considering to expand? How should they expand their market? What can they do to, you know, expand their digital footprint, or whatever it is marketing wise that you can maybe give some comment to?
Sure. I think, first of all, why don't we have some of the attendees tell us, where are you currently importing or exporting from? What can you put there in the chat box some of the countries that you're interacting with, so that we have an idea of the countries that you're dealing with? I think you bring up a good point, Andy, and that is some of our opportunities have kind of shrunk or narrowed in scope because of some of the barriers with international travel. However, there are countries that are stepping up, and there are also countries that we can work with, and trade agreements that are working in our favor if we learn how to navigate those, if we do some research. I would definitely like to know from our attendees, what are you currently struggling with right now? Is there something that you're struggling with? Put it in this chat box here. We have a team of experts on this panel, from Ken to Jeremy, Kurt, Dari, Andy, and Monica. All of them have been in international trade for a number of years, but they've also actually navigated international trade. They haven't just consulted on it. So we would really like to help you and answer questions that might be on your mind or keeping you up late at night. So I see her, okay, Germany, UK, China, Brazil, mainly EU countries. Here's one specifically dealing with domestic time critical freight. And, you know, we saw that from Ken's presentation earlier. You know, you're seeing a lot coming in through Texas. You're seeing a lot of freight coming out of Del Rio, Texas port, and the Eagle Pass, Texas port. What else are
May I intercede right there really quick?
Yeah.
Sure.
Forgive me for interrupting. I'm looking at the variety of countries, and one of the I don't like to use this word loosely, but trends that I've seen among colleagues and peers is not only looking at the countries that you're dealing with, right, but the port of entries that you're dealing with within those countries,
Right.
Because so many of the flight patterns have changed, right?
Yes.
So, and some airports, being that they're smaller, i.e., for example, here in the U.S., if we look at airports that are looking for more business, is routing through Seattle. you know, versus going through LAX because they want the business. So, you know, some of these countries that you're struggling with, perhaps even ask your carriers, you know, even the top three, you know, our DHLs, our UPS, and our FedExes, ask them, how are they routing their goods? Because some of these airports are not, you know, taking the flights that they used to. And I've seen a lot of folks ask, and you don't know unless you ask, like, do you have alternatives? If I'm sending something to Germany, instead of going directly to Germany, is there a way that I could possibly route, you know, through another country and so forth? And that may be a huge cost saving in itself, just by asking. Even the ocean liners are doing that now.
I think you hit a really great point there, Dari. It's not just asking about ports, right? It's really, at this point in our businesses, we need to be looking at everything. Where are we sourcing from? How are we sourcing? What are we sourcing? Because like a lot of our attendees on today's call, they're talking about time critical issues, right? And you can't do business if you can't get it to the client. I mean, what did Amazon do to really increase their business? They didn't start sourcing differently necessarily, but they started getting it to their clients sooner. So the time issue is what put them above the curve. People are ordering from Amazon instead of ordering directly from Nordstrom, right? And they're ordering because they can get it right away. They can get it quicker. So right now in our businesses, we need to be looking and evaluating every one of those areas. What are the countries that are easier to get in and out of? What are the ports that are easier to navigate? Is there a different route to use that could expedite or help us to get those through? As well as all of the other areas in our business that we should be evaluating.
I really like, forgive me for interrupting again, there's a question on here, if I may address it. It says, alongside Darius' comment, we are seeing issues with FDA holds. You know, that's really interesting.
Yep.
That's really interesting because one of the areas that has been very scrutinized is when we deal with the OGAs, right?
Yep.
When we deal with the government agencies. So if my response back to this comment, and I love this comment, you know, there are local FDA offices that you can actually check with to see if they can help you. Like at LAX, there is FDA right there, not at the gateway, but you know, in an office local to LAX. So my recommendation is, depending on what airport that you're coming through or your goods are coming through, reach out to the FDA local representative and see what they can do to help you. If you're having some struggles, feel free to contact me, because I've actually just had to deal with this recently.
Well, one of the things though too on the FDA, what is the FDA system that they put in? I've forgotten the name offhand. Their new
their new implementation, right?
Yeah, whatever this is. They touted it as a learning system. Well, if it's a learning system, looking at your import processes, it's the dumbest learning system I've ever seen, because if, you know, here you register your exporter, your manufacturer, your importer, your facilities and all that. It goes through the trends, and then it looks at, you know, you're normally importing this through LA, let's say, and then all of a sudden it's going to go through Seattle. All of a sudden their system goes haywire. It's like, wait a minute. You've already got registered exporters and importers. A lot of times it's the carrier that's going to change your port of import because of the routing of whatever. The importer doesn't have control over that. So Susan, you make a fantastic point, but I would tell you from a regulatory affairs perspective, this is something that needs to go back to the headquarters of the FDA to hold them accountable. It's actually the centers that are setting up the rules on that, and they start putting in flags and all that so that you can push back on it. But those OGAs, they need to accommodate the changes in supply chain, not be a hindrance to it. And so those FDA holds, in my personal opinion, if you are a registered importer and you've done all, you cross the T's and dot the I's and they're still holding it up, the question is, what does it take for them to give you a systemic may proceed on the FDA? And second to that is that hold them accountable to say it's unacceptable for you to hold up this just because it's physically a different port. So,
and Andy, if I may add to that too, if you're a known consignor, You know, this is where if you belong to any of these programs, CTPAT, known consigner, you know, any of them, if you're embodied in any of the professional compliance programs, right, or networks like WIT or ICPA, or, you know, there's a whole slew of them out there, FTA, whatever it may be, tap into those folks and see what kind of help you can get. And I'd like to point out, I think that this goes back to my main point earlier, is we're going back to basics.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because now we're in a climate that we've never anticipated before. And so maybe, again, going back to square one, to Andy's point, you know, instead of just looking at now, looking at the big picture and you know, holding those folks accountable, but we still have to get our goods in now, right? We still have revenue that we need to get in now. We still have the 11th hour, quarter end, and the month end. And at the end of the day, that's what our supply chain, that's what folks want from our supply chain, is to bring those goods in.
Well, Dari, that talks also to Susan's next point, which was, you know, with COVID and with everything that's happened over the last few months, a lot of companies are now shipping things that they were never shipping before.
Absolutely. All the PPEs. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Andy, I think it would be great if Kurt could talk to that.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, we're seeing a shift in obviously the hand-carried shipments going to cargo in various industries across, you know, the scope of industries that usually do put things on Carnet. And it's a little bit of a learning curve right now for companies, but they're catching on fast because, you know, business must go on, and if you can't get your goods overseas, then business won't go on as smoothly. So there's a shift to cargo. It's like the airlines did. You know, they turned their passenger airlines into cargo planes to accommodate the big rush and the overload and capacity problems. As passenger usage comes back slowly but surely, that shift might go back. But I think the cargo shift from hand carried to a cargo shipment and hire people on the ground as opposed to bringing your own crew is one of the main things that I've seen, and it's been a plus. Obviously, the usage of Carnet can be done both hand carried and cargo, so a very flexible way to move your goods. Another change we're seeing is the use of Carnets for goods that might be permanently entered overseas, and you know, we're also pushing that angle in the sense of it will assist in getting the goods out, and if it does turn into a sale from a temporary import into a permanent entry, it's a very easy process to do, and we have people on the ground that can assist in that. We also, you know, partner with the Liverpool Chamber of Commerce in our UK operation, and we're setting up that assistance as well. So, you know, there's shifts. American business figures it out, and so does the world business people. And you know, it's a slow crawl back, but we're clawing our way back, everyone. And information like this and the change in how we apply the Carnet and we apply the cargo shipment by trade partners in the logistics industry, and it's working out very well.
Kurt, can I ask you a question, if I may? I'm sorry, Andy, may I ask Kurt a quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
From a day-to-day basis, right? So I'm the international person, the international compliance person working for Company A. And for all the years I've used Carnets in my past life and currently, you know, I've always had somebody in company, right, that's applied for the Carnet, and they've carried that Carnet through. Well, you know, with the climate, again, of today's business and people not traveling, I mean, we've all seen it. I went to 11 countries last year, and this year I've been to 3 supermarkets. It's like, yeah, the world has completely changed, right? So what are the trends that folks are seeing for the use of Carnets, and how are they being executed? Like, are they being used by freight forwarders to carry goods onward and so forth? Because it's really a process that you have to, you know, manage, right, and watch to make sure you get everything to and from.
Well, the dream is that it goes to an e-Carnet one of these days. It's like trying, you know, comparing the 85 Carnet countries to signing the European Union Constitution. As you know, you have to get it printed in 50 different languages, but the trends haven't really changed. It's just the volume. And you know, other than shipping, you can't ship consumables, perishables, or through postal traffic. You know, and
Great
just
point, Kurt. Great point.
yeah, and it's the industry is Carnets are probably one of the most universal, internationally recognized customs documents in the world, and they're the hardest to educate the export community on, because they're very it's just so unique, and everyone thinks it's got to be a temporary import in order for it to be on a Carnet. Well, that's just not true. You know,
Yeah, that's Kurt. You bring up a very good point that for myself, I mean, I've been in international trade for 20 years, and I had no idea of the versatility of the Carnet, for instance. And so until I started actually working with Boomerang and understanding more how you solve these problems for clients. I mean, when you're dealing with your clients, you're not just dealing with, hey, I need to process a Carnet for this for 6 months. You're saying, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? Okay, you're having trouble doing this. And one of the key points that the attendees mentioned again is duty optimization is what companies are looking at right now.
Right.
When you look at what Andy was talking about, getting through this time, you know, getting to fourth quarter, right? Companies are trying to survive right now. And one of the best ways for them to survive is to be able to optimize their duties, optimize and leverage their international trade. And so if Carnets can help us do this, I think that's one of the great differences about Boomerang and even you specifically, Kurt, is that what you bring to the table is a problem solution finder, right? You don't just look at it and say, nope, that can't be done, right? Because you're not the compliance guy. You're saying, how can it be done and be compliant, right? That's secondary for you in my mind. That's kind of where I see your difference.
well, when I have a new employee, I commonly say there's no Carnet deal we can't do. It's how you do it. And we bring a unique expertise to the Carnet business. And you're right, Rachel, it's not just processing an online application. It's the support before that. We look at their journey. We look at the countries they're going to, what the problem hot areas are, where there might be problems. Carnets overall just get you through customs faster, and you defer that huge expense, so you can set your budgets way before you make the trip, and you
protect your cash flow.
And your cash flow is protected, and even if you take goods off of a Carnet while you're in country, you know, you divert them from a temporary entry into a permanent entry, and if you do that, you know, under certain conditions before the Carnet expires, of course, there's no penalties or fines. There's just what you would have paid for a regular permanent entry on that particular commodity, and it's based on you know, the Carnet values are based on commercial value, so it's very, very arbitrary. We don't choose to determine what your value is. Now, if you devalue something where it's embarrassingly low, and you know, a first month customs officer would know that a Mercedes-Benz doesn't cost, you know, 10 grand, it costs 100 grand. But that's what our staff's for, is we know how to keep you out of harm's way, and use the power of the Carnet system to move your goods around so you get more sales, you get more visibility of your products, and it kind of levels the playing field with the small, medium-sized enterprises that are going up against the big boys too.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dari said it in the beginning. You got to go back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
People want to make it very complicated and get in an uproar, but really we've got to go back to the basics overall. Ken, I know you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I thought Kurt's suggestion is a good one, just in terms of what Andy talked about, cash flow. And I haven't read a lot about it recently, but in the early stages of the pandemic, you were hearing more and more about, one of the challenges today is that about 40% probably, or something like that, of all air cargo flies in the belly of a passenger plane. And as more and more countries have cut off access to U.S. Passenger flights, it's putting a greater pressure on the freighters, the all cargo flights. And those rates then go up. So I think if I have a U.S. export that needs to get to particularly Europe, Asia is a little more problematic, but to Europe, I would be looking at ocean rates and seeing, how important is it for that product to get there in this amount of time versus this amount of time. Certainly, the reason we fly on planes is because they're faster than ships. But if time is not a critical issue, that's another way you can sort of start looking to preserve your cash flow.
One of the things too, I wanted to change here a little bit. Monique, I'm going to ask you about the entertainment industry here in just a second, and then I want to tee up Jeremy to come back around as we're gearing up. I want you to be thinking about what are some of the things that, from your perspective, somebody should be looking at. What are the questions they need to ask, or whatever, if they want to take advantage of a trade agreement? What do they need to do to protect themselves? But first off, let me go back to Monica here. Is in the film industry, I mean, we all, in the pandemic, obviously streaming movies and shows and documentaries and all the things that are going on from that perspective, we see a lot of things in the film and entertainment industry, as well as the reporters and news media and all that is continuing on. But what do you see, and as far as in the industry and the Carnets and whatnot, what do you see happening with the film and entertainment industry, Monica?
So, Andy, this is an excellent question. As you know, we have vast experience with production companies, news crews, entertainment industry, utilizing Carnets to import their professional equipment, including cameras, costumes, props, lighting, and stage equipment to on-site locations, of course, deferring the payment of import duty and taxes. Film crews, freelance photographers, I mean, you name it, CNN, NBC, Fox News, correct? And they all love using Carnets because Carnet allows you to securely and quickly clear US and foreign customs. So it's really hassle-free, and you have the major cost savings. Recently, what we've noticed, and Kurt touched on this, a lot of film production crews, they cannot really travel or send the people on the flights because of the quarantines and the health risks and limited flight options that they have. So recently we had a production crew, what they did, they sent a shipment via cargo using a freight forwarding company. They shipped it from the UK to US, cleared the shipment, and then hired a crew in the US to do the production. So this is what we're seeing right now. We also still see news crews utilizing Carnets on a daily basis. Just recently, we've done quite a few Carnets for BBC, traveling to Lebanon to cover the news about the events in Beirut. So you can use these Carnets for the hand carry shipments. You can use them for cargo shipments. We do see the shift right now in using Carnets definitely for cargo shipments.
Okay. And that's one thing, and one of the reasons I know we have quite a few freight forwarders and brokers on the line. I bring up that issue with the entertainment industry so that when your salespeople are going out looking for opportunities, hit your local news stations and television stations and, advertising companies that, film, commercials and things of that nature or whatever it is. There's going to be opportunity for them to generate a story, but that equipment has to be shipped. It has to be transported. So hopefully that gives you an idea on some of that. And we also have a job aid that we can give to everybody, and we'll send it out in email on how to utilize a Carnet with, from a cargo perspective rather than hand carry. But let me go back now, as I was saying, Jeremy, as far as some of the trade agreements and things of that nature, if we are looking at expanding, let's say if we want to use the U.S.-Israel free trade agreement or a trade agreement, I'll just say, or USMCA or Japan or whatever it is, all the different trade agreements that the U.S. may have with different countries. What are some of the things that, from your perspective, to do due diligence, should we say, as we're looking to say, is there a market there? What are some things that people should be doing that, in your opinion, to keep themselves compliant or safe? And you're muted. You need to unmute there, bud.
There a lot of people would like me to be muted. Thank God there's no button on me somewhere. Yeah, I guess the first thing is, obviously there's not one size fits all. I mean, every agreement is unique. Like you talk about Israel, it's actually an agreement that's more based on, content, as opposed to rules of origin in a very different way. So different agreements have different requirements. Like we mentioned earlier, Japan's not even a full agreement, so it's essential not to presume the results of one carry over to another. Wildcards can be the other country. I mean, Israel changed its requirements not that long ago for what was required from a supporting documentation for import into Israel to confirm eligibility. So don't just focus on inbound, but think about the outbound in terms of the other country's requirement. Many agreements don't have formal certification. I mean, USMCA was the biggest, NAFTA had the formal certificate. We don't have that anymore, right? So most of these agreements allow an array of supporting information or documentation to attest to the fact that you're eligible. So make sure whatever it is you're relying on, you have it. You don't want to have to suddenly answer an audit inquiry, you don't have it, or you're relying on a third party like a supplier and they haven't kept it. So developing good practices with your supply chain to, one, make sure that they retain all the supporting documentation that they maybe used to certify to you in one way or another that there's eligibility, that they're keeping that for the period required under the importing country's laws. It's not the exporting, it's the importing country's laws, and that can vary from our 5-year requirement. And then also whatever you need to keep. USMCA, if anyone attended the customs technical training, as they called it, they kept espousing this thing that you can self-certify as the importer. Well, you don't want to self-certify as the importer unless you're on both sides of the equation. So then the question becomes, great, they think it's okay, but what does that mean for me if I self-certify? A lot of people say, oh, well, I can sign the document now. Well, do you have the proof? It's not enough to say, well, there's a smokestack down this road that's, spewing smoke, so they're making something, right? We need to know the details. So I think those are the critical considerations. From a U.S. perspective, they've stated, the administration, current administration said, USMCA is the model we're going to use going forward, for purposes of any FTA. So look at the way that that's been crafted. And if you're thinking about going into markets or sourcing from markets where there's potential opportunity for a trade agreement, overlay USMCA sort of the requirements to that and say, okay, if we're going to build a compliance model or a sourcing model, let's start with those building blocks from a free trade agreement perspective and see how they might work within what we're planning to do with our supply chain.
Okay.
One other thought. Don't presume that you can get out of some of the punitive tariffs because you're in a free trade agreement model. So the U.S. dropped a bombshell about 2 years ago on a very simple ruling coming out of Mexico, 3-component ruling, where they said, oh yeah, this product was at that point NAFTA eligible, but because it was Chinese component, it was still subject to Section 301. So for purposes of applying those trade remedies, they're using not the rules of origin that you find in a free trade agreement, but substantial transformation test, which has itself undergone great upheaval in the last 2 years. So anyone who's looking, I know we talked earlier about maybe ways to reduce your cost, your landed cost, and one obviously is to get out of the countries that have these punitive tariffs, but be very careful about what your sourcing guys are proposing to do in terms of moving a sub-assembly and moving an operation to make sure that it aligns with how the U.S. might apply the substantial transformation standard.
Okay, good points, excellent. Derry, I want to come to you as a compliance person that has been with manufacturing and different electronics and different things. What about intellectual property rights as we're trying to expand out, companies that are looking at maybe trying to export a product out even for sale or for a prototype or whatever else? What about that as far as what should they be doing as far as protecting their IP?
Well, first of all, I would never give out any sort of information about the core product that you're shipping out, right? I always tell folks, if you're shipping, regardless, from the smallest widget in the world to, I've worked in nuclear power, you give away your IP and you're giving away the recipe to the pie, right? So for example, if you're going into Hong Kong and you need an import license for encryption to go in there, they do have what they call encryption forms that you have to fill out, and anybody on this call who's had to fill out anything like, say, for SnapR, you have to fill out an encryption form and so forth under the federal trade regs. What I say to do is to share exactly what you would share at a trade show. Send white papers, send public information. Unless you have a guarantee that things are going to be protected, don't share that. Don't share the recipe to the pie. And the other thing is, if you want to cover yourself from a shipping standpoint and to help support brokerage, on the importing country you're coming into or inbound to the U.S., take pictures of everything. Document, document, document. I mean, when you buy real estate, it's all about location, location, location. In this instance, it's all about documentation. And the other thing I would say too is, make sure that the companies that you're dealing with, ask your brokers, ask your freight forwarders, what are their security, what are their cybersecurity protocols? Is your information protected? I know I had a great conversation again among the panelists, and Kurt was talking about the securities that they have through Boomerang. That's important, and I mean it's always been important, but even more so today because everything that we're doing is digital. I mean, we heard what happened with some of the these meeting carriers and people hacking into them. You're sharing your information like we are right now, just by video chat. So make sure that the companies that you're dealing with, that their securities are in place. And ask. You can ask for their security protocols. They should have them, right? If you have a compliance program and you're dealing with securities, they should have that in place.
And I'd like to add something to that. The Carnet document is one of the only documents that I know of in my long career that before entry is allowed in whatever country you're going to, the Carnet is, from a security standpoint, has to be approved entry by 2 different customs services before entry is allowed. And I think that's such a plus that goes by the wayside and most traders, whether you're a sole trader or a very large trader. So it's an interesting thing. And the other thing we're doing at Boomerang Carnets is we're investigating and setting up a program that we can register a manufacturer's intellectual property with customs electronically now. It used to be you'd have to fill out a packet or a compliance packet that goes to customs with the IP information, but now it's registered. So customs will act as a gatekeeper in both as an export of intellectual property, and the overseas customs before the Carnet is presented is already, it's like an advanced manifest where you set it up with 2 different countries under the Carnet, and the data that's on a Carnet's what they call the general list It acts as the manifest and the entry declaration, and that information is manually filed right now, and it's safe because it's in a customs office.
Well, Kurt, if I may, and this is just general global trade compliance 101. Everything is about documentation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to get audited, if you have an internal audit, or if Lord forbid one of those OGAs come in and audit you, which not a fun experience. Been there, done that. It's all about the documentation, right? Fortunately, today some government agencies are taking that electronic, which is huge. And again, forgive me for keep referring to today's business climate, but we're just in such uncharted territories that we have to do what we can, because it used to be back in the day when I started doing this, and I jokingly say when the pyramids were built, everything was by binders and by paper, by leaflet. It's not that way anymore. So not only do you want to work with companies that have incredible security protocols and good protocols for the protection of both people involved, but you want to make sure that you can also access those, and the people that need them can get to them. That's vital here. But any compliance program, you has to be traceable and trackable.
Let me do this. We're running a little short on time. There's going to be two things here that I want to look at. Is one, I want to remind everybody that one of the things that we're offering to everyone is you're going through with your company is you're more than welcome to reach out to us. We're going to offer a 30-minute at least a consultation for you to help you determine your next steps. An outline of what you're trying to, if you're wanting to expand into other markets or whatever you're trying to achieve, we can look at it and at least get you an outline so that you can develop your next steps on what you're looking for there. The other thing is, now I want to go around with the panelists here and just say what would be the takeaway you're hoping for everybody here. I'm going to start with Ken. One of the things I'm hoping is that this is an economy that was self-inflicted, that it was shut down globally. Everybody was shutting down their economy, and it was done fairly quickly. Do you think that as things are opening back up, it will come back quickly? And what do you see in those kinds of trends?
Well, that one's truly above my pay grade, but I think it's in difficult times where there's the most opportunities. Mm-hmm. And this is when certain people are, and I'd love to say I'm one of them, but we'll see. But this is when certain people are going to do very well. They're going to plant the seeds that will position them. One of the things we do with my business in Miami, we gather together the heads of multinationals for Latin America, and we just sort of talk. And within that group, there's a wide range of companies. In some companies, the gentleman duty free is just getting creamed. The gentleman in some of the luxury goods getting hit very hard. But the guy working for Lenovo, they can't find laptops. The guy working for Cisco, they're getting overwhelmed. The guy working for Citrix, who runs Citrix for Latin America and the Americas, busier than they've ever been. So you just got to, within any situation like this, you just got to figure out where the opportunities are. Right now, the perishable, we were talking about Texas and the Mexico border. Well, a lot of that trade is going to be perishable trade. So what does that mean for everybody? Because a lot of perishable food used to go to restaurants, now is not going to restaurants, it's going to supermarkets. We're now eating at home more. Anytime you have change, as much disruption as we're having, and we should be by now pretty well prepared for disruption, because the last few years we've seen a fair amount of change in how we want to conduct trade, right? Both in this country and around the world. So I would say read a lot, pay attention, look at your own life. How have you changed your behavior? What decisions are you making that are different in your life? Because chances are other people are making some of those same decisions. And what does that mean in terms of supply chain? What does that mean in terms of exports and imports? So I just say, it is a question of half empty, half full. Well, this is the time for the half full people to really take charge and do well.
Step up. Good points. Jeremy, how about from your perspective, what do you think should be some takeaways for folks here?
Well, I think Ken hits, you got to be nimble, right? Opportunity is appears where you don't expect it. Maybe as Dari mentioned earlier, companies, how they retooled and changed what they were doing. I know there was a chat comment about it as well. You know, all these companies who saw their normal product opportunities dry up, they all switched over to PPP, right? It was both patriotic and also a good way to keep the lines moving. So I don't think that's going to change. I mean, you know, the notion of opening up to me is such a vague idea. I don't know what that means. You know, we've seen some false starts, and I think that's really a challenge. And to Ken's point, the inconsistency of gold rising and the stock market rising, it truly is a random walk these days. And I think that's true for business. So I think that's it. I think you have to look at how you can pivot. You know, these are big ships. They're not easy to pivot. You know, what about pivoting back? You know, the people who transition their lines for other purposes to pivot back and then start going back to what they were producing. I mean, I think that's it. I think you have to forecast different scenarios and be ready to jump on whichever one, but you can't presume there's going to be one line going forward. I just don't see it. I just see a lot of different paths, and those who think about the paths and how far they can position themselves will be best positioned to take advantage of whatever happens next.
Okay.
I have to say it, Andy. I couldn't hold back. I'm going to say it again. Monica's going to roll her eyes, but we are continually confronted by opportunity, brilliantly disguised as insoluble problems.
Yep.
And you know, combining the flexibility of an ATA Carnet and the adversities we face, and it'll just plow right through. And opportunity, I'm in my heyday these days. I have cockamamie ideas, of course, but one of those billion ideas is that there's opportunity out there all the time.
Yeah, that's true. Dari, how about from you? You just froze up, didn't you?
Oh, yep, Hera, forgive me. I love this question because we're not just seeing how do we survive in today's climate and trade. We're seeing it across every industry. You know, how like here in California, restaurants, all of a sudden they're shut down and then they can reopen and then they have to go to limited outdoor dining. I mean, I think I've had some of the best outdoor dining I've ever had since I was in Europe, right? Just because people are being so creative. So to that point, and I love the word flexibility. I think that's part of the key. You have to be flexible, ebbs and flows, right? Going back to basics. I mean, like in the restaurant industry, how are they going to revamp their business so they can continue keeping the doors open? Reevaluating what we're doing. I heard this morning on the news, you know, grocery shopping has gone up. Groceries have gone up. People are staying home. You know, reevaluate. What is it you really need? Do you really need 4,000 rolls of toilet paper? Probably not. You know, and really, I think that the last point I'd like to make is just networking. I mean, I love the fact that folks have reached out to me that I haven't spoken to, you know, in a number of years or a number of months, because they're like, look, we're kind of stuck and we're just reaching out to our network and to anybody that we can talk to for better ideas. And, you know, you've got some incredible resources right here on this panel. Reach out, use your resources, go to YouTube, go to LinkedIn, tap into some of the professional networking groups. I just think it can be so simplistic. And to Kurt's point, just, you know, I think there's opportunities under every rock, but you just got to go looking for them.
You know, Dari, you hit on a number of things that we hit on the first 3 webinars that Boomerang conducted in this series. This is the last webinar of 4 that we've done leading through crises. So if anyone online has missed any of the first 3, please go back and watch them. Because Jeremy, you said it, on our first webinar, it was all about pivoting. How do we pivot? How do we shift our business to meet the needs that are required right now, right? The second webinar, we talked about flexibility and research and networking, just like Dari explained, right? Are we really connecting to our network, the people that are sourcing for us, the people that are forwarding, the people that are, you know, actually in business with us, not just our clients, but our employees, our network outside of our supply chain. So all of those things is what's going to keep us moving forward and get us to the point that we need to be at in our own businesses. One of the things that you mentioned were restaurants, and we talked about this last month on the call. You know, they've had to recreate and be creative about how they're getting their product to the customers now, right? So whether it's a new drive-through that they set up, or whether it's Red Lobster is delivering in a parking lot at one point. Chick-fil-A was doing family meals with chicken parmesan, right? I mean, they're really coming up with new and creative ideas to get customers and to keep customers, and we have to follow their lead. One of the most important things that I could say, Andy, is we can't just look at our own industry to know what to do. We need to look outside of our industry. How are other industries pivoting? How are other industries handling this, right? Because you can learn from a first responder how they're handling something that maybe you've never had to deal with. But if you could react in that same way, you could really change the way you do business. So don't just look inside your industry that you're in, whether you're a pharmaceutical industry or whether you're an automotive industry or whether you're a manufacturer. Look outside of your own industry and glean from other industries and how they're changing and moving forward.
Sounds good. Monica, any last comments?
Well, everyone has made excellent comments. What to look for in the next few months. What we are seeing, we are seeing slow increase in temporary exports and import into the foreign countries. Obviously, businesses, they want to continue to do business. There's a lot of opportunities with Brexit coming up and with the trade agreements. And if you have export or goods that you want to demo overseas, or you have a project you're working on, or you want to do research, you can definitely utilize Carnet for that.
Appreciate that. Folks, I greatly appreciate my panel here. That has been fantastic. I hope you've gleaned a lot from it. And if there's any help that anybody needs, reach out to us and we'll put you in contact with these folks or the right expert for whatever you're striving for. For that, we've come to the end of our time. I actually went over just a little bit, and I appreciate everybody's diligence. Thank you to everybody, or the panelists and those attended. So have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you all.
Bye.